This is a Going Back, Remembering UGA interview with UGA alumnus and former Associate Vice President for Development and University Relations and Vice President for Governmental Relations at the University of Georgia, Larry Weatherford. What a title. Today, April 21st, 2014, we are in the conference room of the Ray Nicholson House on the University of Georgia campus in Athens. Others with us today include Alice Vernon and videographer Bill Evelyn, members of the Going Back crew, and I'm Fran Lane. Welcome, Mr. Weatherford.
Thank you very much.
We're just so pleased to have this opportunity to visit with you today, and let's start in the beginning, your beginning. You grew up right down the road from campus in Oconee County. Will you share a little bit with us about growing up in Bishop, Georgia in the 40s and 50s?
Well, first place, Fran, it was Watkinsville instead of Bishop, and I was born in the Changang Warden house in the front bedroom there, and then lived until I was about 3.5 years old in the first floor of the jail. There was an apartment there. My grandfather was a Changang warden. That had nothing to do with nepotism. It was all about family. But we moved out of the jail when my sister Wilma was going to be born, so she wouldn't have to say she was born in jail, and lived in numerous houses in Watkinsville. I think it may have had something that Mama would move every time the house got dirty, but
a great idea.
Toward the late 30s, we moved into the Eagle Tavern, and I lived there for a while.
Is that right?
And
any ghosts?
And then the ghosts, no ghosts, but ghost stories. And one of them was that we heard about the University of Georgia was going to be built. And they were considering building it out near Watkinsville, but because of the bars and houses of ill repute in the county, they decided to put the students out in the country and not have them exposed to that. And surprisingly enough, we passed a law, they did in Oconee, to have drinks, liquor by the drink 2 years ago. And at the same time, there were 43 pouring licenses within 2 blocks of the arch. So maybe we made a mistake.
I was getting ready to say, yes, sir.
But I lived there and around, and then when my grandfather died, my father inherited a farm between Athens and Watkinsville, and so I lived and worked on the farm for until my dad was drafted in the service in '43. But I have a story about it because my dad worked at Webb Crawford, who is McLean now, but we had a couple of African-American couple named Henry Brown and Fody, and I worked for Henry. Henry was my boss, farming, and whatever he told me to do, whether it's plowing or, hoeing cotton or taking cotton to the gin or whatever it was, he was my boss. And he was so good to try to teach me. And I think back over it that my favorite story about him was we picked cotton together, and I picked 2 rows and he picked 2. And one time I got to a point where there was no cotton, and Henry had gotten so far ahead of me that he couldn't talk to me. So all the cotton was my row, he had picked it, so I could get caught up where he could talk to me and continue to. But it was a conversation and teaching to me about what was right and wrong and things like that was one of the highlights of my time. So the other thing about it was that all the cotton he picked on my row was left in a pile, so I could put it in
your bag,
my sack. Yeah. So.
What a good man! You had good early influences in.
Absolutely. Not only that, but so many other people. When we moved back into town, Mama didn't want to stay out there by herself when Dad was gone, and moved back into a 1-bedroom apartment up in my aunt's house. And I started working at that point when I was 13, I think, and worked in the grocery store and carried papers and things like that. But I had my mom was great, my dad was great, and so many people in Watkinsville were really, really great for me.
It does take a village sometimes to
Great
influences
absolutely.
that lead us on.
Absolutely.
Well, now, Larry, you went to high school. You went to Oconee County High School, is that right?
I did, Watkinsville High School. Back in those days, it was Watkinsville and Bogart. And today it's Oconee and North Oconee. We're back to we consolidated, and when we integrated the school in the 50s, I believe it was, up at the crossroad. And now it's a middle school, but now we're back to having two high schools like we used to have.
They got a pretty good rivalry going already, don't they?
Well, we do, and I started the Alumni Association, me and a group of my friends of Oconee. We tried to bring the Bogart people into the group, because they had a lunch and we had a dinner, but we invited them and finally did. But I always opened the meeting when I would talk to them by telling them that I would forgive them for breaking my Uncle Tadpole's leg in the 35 basketball game. So. But our school out there in Oconee is still good, if you do that. But the schools were kind of the central part of the community. The leadership, the teachers, were the leaders in the community, along with the business people and the government people. So we just had a great place to grow up, and the example that people set for you and things like that were just great. And I wanted to say one other thing, Fran. The schools. My mom was a teacher. Taught 1 year, and then they closed Carrillo School. She started out, Dad went in service, and then they passed the compulsory school law where kids had to go to school, and Mom took the job as a visiting teacher. And she was the first one there, and one of the first in the state, and later on she helped train, working. She finally got a 6-year, I believe it's 6-year degree over here in education, but she trained visiting teachers around the state.
That would have been an interesting job, to go into a home and find out why that child wasn't.
Well, and she had the ability to make things happen. And the school system shut. We went to school 5 weeks, I believe it was, in June and July, when the war was going on and all the men were gone. And then we shut down for 5 weeks to pick cotton. Mm-hmm. And there wasn't anybody left,
right.
There working. So
late August and September, was that cotton time?
Yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah. And
I had never heard that story before.
Yeah. I don't know whether other counties did that or not, but we did, and the school system has been such an important part of Oconee County, and it was just a great place to grow up. My dad was a mayor. My grandfather was chairman of the county commission. My other grandfather was a chain gang warden. We all been in public life, or they were, and so.
You had to step up.
I guess that's why I ended up being whatever they call you about being at the public trough.
We don't talk about that, your careers, in a little while, but, well, it's interesting. We've talked to several people who grew up in small towns, and the idyllic life that those folks, and that I had a similar experience. It's a different, sort of a different world these days, and not that it's not fine, it's just different.
That's true. We had, the businesses there were strictly grocery store. We didn't really have any businesses other than grocery stores, and farmers raise their own food or whatever it is, and then working in the grocery store, you traded as much loaf of bread for a chicken as you did. They'd bring it in, and then you would sell it. But I think that agricultural people are very independent. They don't, they want their land, they want this. But if that fellow, the next door neighbor's barn burns down, they all come together and build another barn, and that's just the way it is in the if you say rural, I guess we were rural, living next to the city of Athens. Yeah, right. Which there are many stories about, by the way.
Well, now, you went to Oconee County High School. Larry, when did you know from the beginning you were going to college?
Yes, I did. I wanted to go to North Georgia College, and as I get to during the discussion today, my major interest at that point in my life was military. And we had the North Georgia Military School, you know, at Dahlonega. I didn't think we couldn't afford that, and tuition was $60 a quarter. I had worked and saved up $400 to go to the university, and I got serious with Catherine a little bit before that, and my teeth were bad. And so I spent most of that $400 cleaning up my teeth so I could court her, and my dad had to help me with the tuition a little bit, but I worked most of the time over here. But I always wanted to go to college. I wanted to go there because it was a military school. But when I came here, as we get to later on, one of my major interests was ROTC and the military.
What do you remember? What the process was to gain admission to the University of Georgia in the 1950, 49, 50?
I think all you had to do was have $60, and I don't remember ever having a question. I had pretty good grades in high school, which when I came over here, the circumstance changed a little bit. But I was young. I just turned 16.
Went through the 11th grade, right? Is that
11th grade?
Back there,
I just
you
turned
didn't have
16.
A 12th grade.
No, and so I think whether it was immaturity or whatever it was, but the combination of that and the fact that I always had a job while I was going to school. I always planned to stay home, because in Watkinsville, every morning, if you wanted to come to Athens, you get out on the street and somebody will pick you up. And I hitchhiked over here. I didn't have a car for years, and I just go up and
caught a ride.
That's exactly right.
And on campus, I understand that's the way folks got around in Athens.
Well, I made one of my notes about you were talking about the campus, and maybe this is ahead of time, but there were 3 stops. One at the corner up here at Lumpkin and Broad. That's before Holiday Inn was built. The Y was in there, but that was a spot where you stood and waited to be picked up. The first stop was at the Fine Arts Building. The third one was at the top of Ag Hill. And nobody in Athens would pass that place without stopping, and as many kids as could get in the car got in it and did that. And we did do some walking down the hill. The road over the at the end of the football field wasn't there then, so that you had to go down and climb the hill back up. But
a different time.
Different time, yeah.
Well, all you had to do was pay your money and sign your name to get in.
As far as I know, that's exactly right. No.
Well, go back then and talk a little bit about the physical appearance of campus. What do you remember about it?
The North Campus was pretty much it in terms of that, except for agriculture. And we had the dairy farm out where the recreation building is now. There was pasture out there. As I recall, because I started right after the Second War, and a lot of veterans were back, and they had some buildings out there where veterans, trailers, for example, where veterans who were married could come and stay in those. And we didn't have the conference center, we didn't have the Stegman Hall. Our baseball field was up there after we closed it down here at the bottom of the hill. It was where Tate Center was at one time. That was before my time, though, but there was not much activity up there. Most of it was right around town.
Pretty much.
And of course, the varsity was like a part of campus. And the pool rooms, 2 of them on either side of the varsity, were a part of the university students' recreation.
Well, now, is that where you hung out?
I did. I made in my notes that I was making. I didn't have much involvement with the university other than going to class. And if we had a break between class, we'd go down and shoot pool at the student center down there, which was, I forget the name of the building that's still down there, but we had a pool room, tables in
Memorial Hall?
Memorial Hall. And, but that was about the only thing that I did, other than any time we had something military, well, I would. You were here. Be part of that, yeah. But I think, Fran, the fact that I have worked ever since I was 11 years old, you know, so I didn't have time to get involved in much of the university's activities. Right.
And that's helped you in your life, hasn't it?
Ma'am?
That's helped you in your life that you started working early.
Oh yeah, I had no question about that. I've been the luckiest fellow in the world to always have a job. It just looks like things break for you, you know, when during the Second War with all the guys gone, we were, 3 of us out of the high school got to work in the in the grocery store. You know, I mean, when the guys came back from the war, we had to, they got their job back, which is proper, but just been lucky all the time to be able. I worked at the Gulf station out here, right on out on Lumpkin out here, corner of Lumpkin and whatever the street on the other side of Clayton is. I can't remember, Washington Street. Right. And I worked there for a while, and after I came back from the military, and I worked at the creamery.
What a great job.
Absolutely. But most of the time was in Watkinsville at grocery stores, carrying the paper and things like that.
I was going to say, I wish I'd had a job at the creamery, but I wouldn't have been able to get in this room had I. Do love that ice cream. So when you were here, there were a number of veterans back. And so
yes, we had about 3,500, as I remember, about 3,500 students, and I could be wrong about that, but that's about it. And a lot of guys coming back on the GI Bill were able to come back to the university.
So you had an interesting mix. You had young folks,
yes,
and then you had these folks that were 20s, 30s, and
yep,
who'd been through the
most
war
in their
experience.
20s, yeah. And but it was a, and I wished I had the numbers. I don't, but I think that boys came more than girls to the a lot of the women went to normal school and places like that. But I think the count would be heavier for boys than girls.
And you commuted from Watkinsville, caught rides.
Yeah.
Your major, Larry, you've got a BS ED in elementary education, is that right?
Mm-hmm. But when I came here, Fran, I wanted to major in journalism. I have always enjoyed writing, and I thought journalism was a good thing for me. And I took the first quarter, had to take Spanish, and the lady that was a teacher was a Spanish lady, and she had black hair, and it was pulled back way too tight. She gave 13 tests the first 13 days, and I flunked every one of them. So I changed my major to education after that, because I didn't have to take a foreign language.
That hadn't changed.
And that was the sole reason. My mom was in education. I had aunt was in education, and so I had such a attachment to teachers or whatever it is. But I think it was a foreign language that got me into the.
I tell you, that hadn't changed. I don't think. Yeah, it certainly hadn't changed by the time I got there. Yeah. A lot of decisions were made based on that language business. So, Did you find that you were one of the lone males in that group, and there were a lot of good pretty female elementary education majors? That would not have been a bad idea.
It was. I didn't engage in that because I had interest in Bishop.
You'd already picked yours out.
Well, I was waiting to be picked out. I was competing, if you will.
Oh.
I'm talking about Catherine, you know.
Right. Well, Larry, did you have to practice teach?
I did after I came back from the Army.
Well, now.
I went 4 years and didn't finish.
Okay.
And then my ROTC class, we were commissioned as second lieutenants. And we all but one volunteered. That was during the Korean time, 1951. And each of us, except one, I believe it was one, I may be wrong about that. And Catherine was arguing about whether it was 100 of us, I don't remember. But I went into service at that point and served my 2 years and then came back because my grade structure in the early days was not too good. In addition to that foreign language, I enjoyed human biology 1 and 2 so much that I took each one of them twice. And my grade I did not do well in the early part, and thank goodness as I grew up, maybe matured a little. I was 16 when I started. I don't know whether that had anything to do with it or not, but nevertheless, I struggled a lot and didn't do well at all in my grades until the last half. Maybe I did a little better.
Came back. But talk a little bit about your interest in the military and ROTC. So you started.
I thought all my time I was interested in the military, and as I said earlier, I wanted to go to North Georgia to get my commission up there, but I knew that I wanted to do that. I would have stayed in the active Army, but I think, Catherine was not as happy with that as I was, so as it turned out, I joined the reserve a year or so after I came off active duty and spent, like 28 years in the reserve.
Right. You retired as a colonel?
I did, yeah. And but I enjoyed it. It allowed me to satisfy my interest in the military and stay home too. I'd just be gone on the weekend.
Yeah, not be in trouble.
Right, yeah.
Where did you go after you?
I went, first place we went to summer camp together,
Right.
A group of us, and went up to Fort Knox because our branch was armor here, tanks.
Okay.
And we went to Fort Knox for our summer camp, and then when we graduated, I was assigned to the 82nd Airborne Division, the tank battalion in North Carolina, and they didn't drop any tanks out of airplanes, So we went back to Fort Knox for basic officer course for about 3 months. And then I moved to Fort Bragg and stayed there for the rest of that first year. In 1952, I went to Germany, and during the Korean War, and our unit served as we patrolled the Iron Curtain, so-called Iron Curtain, on our side, and you didn't get shot at much like the guys did in Korea. But we were in that sort of a environment. And I spent a year over there and had a great experience during that particular time. And then when I came back and was discharged, I came back to the university. I had the GI Bill, so I was able to get help. But I also worked at the creamery during the.
A couple of things I want to ask you about then. The GI Bill changed the way higher education in this country.
Yeah, I think that's true. Things happen in this, and it all depends on the environment it happens in, as you and I were talking about, Alice. And I think right then that it did a lot to enhance higher education in the country. And it was right. I remember that I had one story when I was with the Labor Department in Washington when Vietnam was over. The Vietnam veterans did not have a benefit. They were not covered. So we proposed and did finally get the bill passed that would allow them to have the GI Bill. And one of the things, cause those guys over there had the toughest time. It's so awful because the people back home were disgusted with the thing, didn't feel like they were supported. But when we were testifying in Congress about the bill for the Vietnam veterans, the GI Bill, one member of the Sergeant Majors Association testified the same time we were, and he said they should not have the benefits. We ran him out of the congressional hearing. Everybody picked him up and toted him out of that room because it was so damaging, so wrong and everything for him to do that, because it was just tough. Those guys had a tough time.
It was
it's not pretty good. And I like to say back in the old days, we were in the tank deal. I said, if you see somebody out there, you shoot them, you kill them. Today, you don't know whether a kid is got a bomb or somebody else. You just don't know what it is. And you can't pull back and take 2 weeks off and R&R, no more, because you don't know who's coming down the street there. So
it's amazing the changes.
Yeah.
The other thing I want to talk about is the creamery. What did you do tell us first, for posterity here, where the creamery was.
It was over on, I can't remember, Fran, I got to be 83 now, I can't remember the street, but it's the street behind the courthouse.
Is that right?
Yeah, it was down now, just to the left. You go past, right out Lumpkin to, what's the street past Washington, the next one? Hancock. Turned down, it was on Hancock Street, right down about a block from that.
So the creamery wasn't over on campus?
No. It was a creamery where we took, it wasn't the university's creamery. It was private, yeah. And but it worked there, and Rosa Lee from Watkinsville was a clerk there, and I worked for her. So I just sold.
I was gonna say, did you get to test the ice cream, or were you just?
Yeah, you wouldn't dare sell nothing you hadn't tasted first.
Oh, what a great job! I just remember.
It was, and I worked there until I graduated, and left, and it was just ideal because number one, we were pretty well off with the GI Bill. Seemed like it was like they gave you, I can't remember how much they gave us then, but we had to pay our tuition out of the amount we had then. It wasn't.
And you got living expenses.
We got it, that was the bill at that time. That was different from the GI Bill, but we got paid so much a quarter, I believe, 200 maybe a quarter.
You were in Hancock.
We were well off. That's right. We paid rent.
So. Larry, did you have any favorite or influential faculty that had any influence on you? Or?
I didn't. I had, as I said, as soon as class was over, I'd go to work, go do something else. Dean Tate was a institution.
Yes, he was.
And I mean, not only me, but everybody else felt that way. And I think that I had one professor uniquely that, I think it was math, and he would come in every day and raise a window and throw up. You hear about that?
You can tell it again.
Who was his name?
What is it, Pope Hill? Was that who it was?
May very well have been. I couldn't
Heckman?
Remember. I don't remember. But he threw that chalk out and said one day it's going up instead of down.
We've heard that story. It is amazing it is amazing, isn't it? Some characters.
I didn't have much relationship with the faculty.
And for fun, you went to the pool room?
Shot the pool room, that's right. And
did you go to commencement or homecoming?
I went to commencement. I wanted to tell you, and I didn't know where the proper time was, but in 1932 or 33, I rode in the homecoming parade in a wagon pulled by a billy goat. I had a red sweater on with a black G cut out of my grandfather's felt hat. And fellow on Monkey Avenue in Watkinsville, Claude Gable, had this wagon and a monkey. I mean, a goat. And the goat would hook up to the wagon. And so I came to Athens with him, and we rolled in the homecoming parade. Now I can't find a picture. I'm still looking for a picture.
We need something for the archives.
I need it to facilitate my story.
Well, that was great.
Yeah.
Oh.
I think on activities, athletic football.
You
primarily.
went to football games?
Oh yeah, I was here when we went to the Rose Bowl in 1942. We played Tech. The stadium was sold out, and my dad was able. They decided to sell one seat in each aisle. In other words, you sat in the aisle. You know, the aisles are this wide, and they decided to cut them in half, and you said, and he bought 2 tickets, and I went to that football game. Well, we beat Georgia Tech 33-0, you know, before we went to the Rose Bowl from that. But I saw, it was interesting, when I was working over here, somebody asked me one day when I was working the president's box, said, how many games have you watched up here in the president's box? I said, about half as many as I have from the trestle. I worked in the grocery store, and the crowd coming to the games, you know, the cars would be, traffic would be heavy, and there was a 1-lane bridge out here between here and Watkinsville, you know, and a lot of times I've seen that on big games when the traffic would nearly back up at Watkinsville when they stop at, but the fellow that I worked for in the grocery store would let me, after the traffic over there, take the truck, and I'd come over and park on Railroad, go up on the trestle, watch the game as long as I got back to work before the crowd got there to do it. But I just a lot of interest in the football.
Mr. Charlie Tripp is my next door neighbor.
Oh, really? Yeah.
And he has some great stories.
He sure does.
So
Charlie was a freshman, you know, when we went to the Rose Bowl, and Sinkwich had hurt his leg, and Trippy did all the running, gained all the yards in the game, but the only touchdown we ever made was about 6-7 yards out. And when they got down there, they took Trippy out and put Frank in and let him score the touchdown. So, but it's great.
Any other campus characters that you think of beside Dean Tate? Or?
No, I don't.
He was iconic. There's no question.
Yeah.
What's your favorite memory about the University of Georgia when you were here in school?
Other than graduating, I think the military ball, when me and Catherine went to the military ball.
Talk about the military ball.
I've been looking for the picture of that, but I couldn't find it. But in all my stuff. But that was an event we went to. I used to go to basketball, you know, some over at was Woodruff Hall, I think it was, and but those were the athletics. I just didn't spend a lot of time on campus.
Well, at the military ball, you were dressed in your uniform, and Catherine would have worn a ball gown. And
Catherine was an excellent dancer, and I was not. So we.
How'd y'all work that out?
Well, we had give and take. But we enjoyed that. So she went to Milledgeville to school. So
GSCW.
But we would come to the activities up here. So
did you do the grand march at the military ball where everybody lines up and then joins up and? I've seen some great pictures of that in the Pandora.
Yeah, we did. So.
Big band.
Yeah, and they used to bring bands in here, you know, and perform down at.
Right.
I can't remember what the building name was down at where the swimming pool was.
Stegman.
Stegman was it called Stegman? Yeah.
I was going to say, is there anybody that you can tell a story about that we might have to edit, or do we need to just move on?
Well, I'm not really sure. I think we'd move on.
Yeah,
maybe.
I don't
That's
want to
right.
get you
Yeah,
in
so,
trouble.
Yeah.
Let's talk a little bit about post-college. I think it was either Dr. Chuck Knapp or it was Tom Jackson's that said when the time came for your retirement, you're going to be in great shape because you could retire from 3 different careers, the U.S. Army, the U.S. Labor Department, and the University of Georgia. And I'm not sure, but there are more than that you can retire from.
Well, I worked a little while at Georgia State after we got to
And I certainly don't believe that you'll ever really, truly retire. But let's start. You've talked about your military service. Is there anything else there that we...
I really, in all of my comments or whatever it is, I have been the luckiest person in the world to have not only the jobs that I had, but to have the supervisors or bosses or whatever you want to call them, and the people that work with me there. I can't tell you enough about how lucky I have been with that, and I think part of that comes about because I was had the opportunity to work for some outstanding individuals who knew how to bring folks together. Mm-hmm. And I attribute that, Fran, to the fact that most of my work in the Labor Department was intergovernmental. In other words, when I worked at the state level for a while, and then later at the federal level, the feds had the money, they passed it to the state had certain authority. It just wasn't a deal of writing a letter to them and say, you go do this. It was a matter of, these are the goals that we're shooting for, what have you. And in order to make that happen, you got to learn how to work with people. And I think from that standpoint, I just can't tell you how much in all of my jobs that I've had that. But when I graduated and went to the Labor Department,
how did you get started at the Labor Department?
Well, I went to Winder when I was fixing to graduate and get my degree, and asked Mr. Osborne, my principal out at Watsonville, if he might give me a job, and he couldn't. So I had dated a lady from High Shoals whose dad worked in the employment office.
You got some good contacts.
Yeah, and Mr. Sam Hale, who's retired military, told me that the Labor Department was going to hire. They had just gotten a budget increase. They were going to hire some people, and that I ought to go take the test for employment interviewer at the merit system, which I did. And then I don't know whether Mr. Sam had anything to do with it or not, but fairly quickly I got a job offer in Augusta. Mm-hmm. And it was so great because I had spent a lot of my growing up years in the summers and whatever with a favorite uncle down in Augusta, and my job is an employment interviewer in the local employment office down there with the first one. And my job, I had 2.5 years there before I moved to the state office in Atlanta. And I had, during that 2 years, the opportunity to do nearly everything they had to do in the office. I did job placement, I did claims taking for unemployment insurance, farm labor for farmers down there, where I remember going to Ray Goff's, not Ray Goff, I can't remember what the other one is, but I'll think of it after a while. But I went down there to one of our football players, All-American football players. Dad took farm labor down there to his kitchen. He was in the kitchen having breakfast when I got down there. But I had all of that. Then I spent the last year or so being a labor market analyst, where every 2 months you publish a labor market report about employment and unemployment and what have you. And I had that, and you take into account in 4 years, and not really less than 4 years, about 3 years, I had experience in 4 different areas. Then I got offered a job in Atlanta in the labor statistics area, and I did the I was supervisor of the labor market analyst who did what I did in Augusta, and did some research. I did a research project on characteristics of unemployed people. I remember my commissioner over there, when I was briefing him on the findings of that report, and I told him that I said, in studying the characteristics of the unemployed by sex, I noticed some differences. And he threw his hand up. He said, well, why the hell did you spend all that money? I said, looked like you'd already known that. But nevertheless, that's a kidding deal. But seriously, I had a chance to do research. I worked up there until 1958 when I got a call from my good friend Julian Colquitt, who was working in the Federal Regional Office, and he advised me that I was to apply for a job out there. And so I did, and then went to work at the Federal Region, where we had the 6 southeastern states. And I went out there, and the first 2 years or so out there, I worked in all different fields of checking on foreign labor down in picking cotton in Cordele, and unemployment insurance and placements and employment service and what have you. And then we reorganized, and I became the regional director for unemployment insurance for the Southeast region. And then stayed in that job for 7, 8 more years. And then they moved me to be the regional director for finance and administration. So if you just follow that sort of trend, I've just had so many opportunities to learn, and had that job when I got the call to go to Washington. So as I indicated to you before, just amazing how lucky I have been. And along the way, unique individuals who influenced you. In Augusta, my local office manager taught me the value of maintaining great relationship with the business community, because that's who you're serving. I learned about that, and I moved to the research and statistics in the state office, and Mr. Stevenson taught me about it ain't close, it's got to be right, from that standpoint. And moved out into the regional office, where I think probably the one most influential individual, Mr. Ernest Marbury, was our administrator, and he's the one that taught me about intergovernmental relations and how it works. And sometimes you can tell folks what to do, but more times than not, you got to talk them into it. Mr. Marbury was the rarest individual. I had a couple of stories of we didn't have computers then, we had typewriters, and all the mail that transmitted from the region to the state directors or state secretaries or whatever, he signed them. And if for some reason one of the secretaries would have an erasure on there, he would always call in whoever dictated the letter. And he would say, erasure on a letter is the same thing as you going there in person with a white tie on and a ketchup spot on it. And he said the person that gets a letter is going to spend all their time looking at the ketchup and not paying attention to the letter. So we were very careful as secretaries were. But that was the quality of the deal. My other favorite story about him was when we started to integrate the offices in the 60s. We had African American or black officers in a lot of the cities and what have you, and the new rules came down. You got to put them all in there together. Well, we worked out in all of 6 of our states. Mississippi was the slowest one coming along, and my good friend and the old deputy over there was a part of the White Citizens Council, and so they just couldn't pull it off over there. Mr. Marbury came in one morning, and he had announced when the law was passed to me and Julian Colquitt, my friend. He said, "You two have to integrate. I can't do it." He was from Alabama. And he didn't dislike folks or whatever, but he said, "I just can't bring myself to do it." He said, "Y'all go get it done." Well, we got it done, except in Mississippi. Well, one morning he came in and he told Julian, he said, "Julian, I want you to go to Mississippi with me." And the thrill would always travel with Mr. Marbury. I mean, that was a highlight, you know. And Julian said, "Yes, sir." Mr. Marbury said, "Well, when we're going to go?" And he said, "At 10 o'clock. And Julian said, "Well, is there anything I need to get together?" He said, "No, just get your hat and coat." They got on the airplane, flew over there, and somebody met him at the airport, and he went down to the director's office, the state director's office, and he told him to call Walter in, his deputy. Mr. Marbury never sat down. He stood up the whole time. And he said, "Johnny," he said, "we're having trouble getting this integration done." He said, "I don't like it any better than you do, but it's got to be done." He said, "Johnny," said, "you can be with us or you can not do it." He said, "If you're with us, thank you." He said, "If you're against us, I'll nickel and dime you know what to death." He got by, he never sat down. He walked out the office, went back, got on the airplane, and come back home. That was a way he was so cooperative in everything all along, but when time came to do it, he did it. And I think that's symbolic of the relationship that I worked in so long with the feds and the states, and later in years with the locals, about if there's money coming out of the federal government, the states got responsibility, they got rights and that sort of thing. But being able to work it out and make it happen is the important thing that I learned. He was the best one. There are others who along the way who did that well, but Mr. Marbury was probably my greatest mentor, if you will, about how to operate in the government sector with that sort of situation.
Talk a little bit about a experience you had with Mike Wallace in 60 Minutes.
The history of unemployment insurance, there was a magazine, and I think it was Time, but I can't be sure about that. That every time we'd have high unemployment and trust funds would get low and things like that we'd finally get straightened back out and the economy would pick up, they'd always write an article criticizing the unemployment insurance program. Well, after the early 70s recession, and that's the one that I moved to Washington during it, and we had to straighten it out. Well, television came along, so I get a call from the public affairs officer in the Labor Department, said that 60 Minutes, and Mike Wallace, I believe, seemed like to me was wants to come and talk to you about it. And so obviously I called Mom and Dad and I said, "I'm gonna be on TV." Well, anyway, he came up and he interviewed me and we talked, and I must have answered a ton of questions. And finally, when it's gonna be shown, I'm excited about it. Well, it comes on and they show 10 different situations where claimants had drawn benefits that they shouldn't have drawn. One golfer from Michigan going down and spending 6 months on the coast in Florida and drawing, some lady driving up to the office in a pink Cadillac, you know. It just and you got millions of people drawing, but they picked these out anyway. And after they showed them all, you know, he said, and we turned to the director of the unemployment insurance program, and I show up and I was smiling, you know, and I said, "I don't think there's widespread fraud in the unemployment insurance program." But that was the way that played it out anyway. And I got the tapes from it, but couldn't never get it done. But I said, as I've said a lot of other times before, if your job is giving people money to do nothing, you don't want to see 60 Minutes come to your office.
Oh yeah, I thought I heard you say that if it was a bad morning when Mike Wallace showed up in your front door.
Well, that was his. It wasn't my front door. He pulled up in the office, I think. Yes.
During your time in Washington, you ended up working with Charles Knapp, who later became
I did.
president of the University of Georgia. Is that right? Tell us a little
yes,
bit about
I did.
it.
When I went there, President Nixon was still president, and then Secretary Dunlop came in to work with President Ford when Nixon left, and President Ford took over. You remember Nixon resigned, and so I had my first round until 1977 with the Republicans and President Ford, but then when President Carter was elected, Ray Marshall became the Secretary of Labor, and everybody was excited because I was old Georgia boy and the president was going to be from Georgia and all of that. And Chuck Knapp came in to be Ray Marshall's executive assistant. And Ray's son had cancer. And while Ray came to work and everything, his mind was so caught up in that Chuck, in fact, and I've said this and he'll shake his head about it, but in fact, we looked to Chuck to run the Labor Department, and he was 29 years old. I believe he was 29, something like that. Anyway, that's the first time I met him, and working in the Secretary's office. And then after that, during the course of the administration, the Assistant Secretary whom I worked for was a fellow named Ernie Green, and Ernie was one of the Little Rock Seven who integrated the schools in Arkansas, you know.
Governor Faubus didn't want that to happen.
Correct.
Yeah.
But Ernie came in, and I had a call to be the deputy, possibility of being the deputy. And Ernie and I had lunch, and then appointed somebody else, you know. But for about a year later, after he left, that fellow left, then I became Ernie's deputy. Well, they asked me to do a study about how our department was running, not the whole labor department, but the employment and training department. And I did it, and Ernie was involved heavily in the politics, and he was a political appointee and whatever. So one of the things they did is Chuck left the secretary's office and came over. While I was the deputy to Ernie, Chuck came over and we split the duties. And I kept the day-to-day operation, but Chuck handled the things that Ernie would normally have handled. But he was really into politicking for the re-election and all of that. So that was the first time that Chuck and I kind of worked for him for the longest time. Nick Geddes was also in that administration. But Chuck came over and we worked together and shared the functions over there for a good while. He was a rare bird, a young person at that point in time. He's always been mature though, and did a great job there. And I would talk about him here too, and I think from that standpoint.
Okay. Talk about coming to the University of Georgia. What precipitated that?
Nick Geddes was the governmental affairs person. He worked for a senator from New Jersey, I believe, and then when they came in, Nick came over to the department as a governmental relations person. And Nick and I, because I've worked so closely with the Congress in unemployment, that program is so technical or whatever it is, you know, going through somebody ain't always the best way to do it. But Nick worked in there, and Nick was smart, no question about that, and from that standpoint. And I think when Chuck came here, Nick came with him. And I've said it all along. I had a conversation with Chuck, and then Nick called me about coming to work over here. And I had long years at the Labor Department, could retire and take my pension and get a good job, as they say. But came to work over here for Nick. But Chuck Knapp was he was a friend as much as anything else, but a wonderful, wonderful boss. And I worked for him, you know, and I never worked directly for him until I came over here. But I think that that's the reason our experience back in Washington and my work. And I've always said that Nick came, you know, and the first thing he said, you can't have the bulldog taller than the arch, you know. You remember him saying that, and the picture that we got with the bulldog with his arm on the arch, Nick said, we ain't gonna have no more. And I kind of figured then that Chuck knew he needed somebody like us, didn't he? And so I think that's why I ended up over here. But Chuck and I just had a conversation. He didn't offer me a job, but Nick did after that. So.
And this would have been about 88?
88.
1988.
Right, yeah.
Tell us what you did, what your job here was, and what you looked after.
When I was Nick's deputy, you remember we had the public information and fundraising,
right.
Alumni, all of that was in the office at Nick's Stegman. And I was the so-called operating officer. Nick handled all the policy and that sort of thing. And budgets and the management side of day-to-day management is what I did. Mick was kind of the policy person, and I was more of the day-to-day manager there from that standpoint.
Who did you meet on campus that sticks in your mind while you were in that job?
On the whole job at the whole time at the university? Well, so many of y'all. You know, we had a great staff, and without question. You know, I think George Stafford was out there at the time, if you remember that, working with the foundation. Cindy showed up, and Cindy's we ain't had
Cindy
no trouble.
Cole.
That's right.
Yeah.
And I think Dave Muir. The secret, Fran, I think, was that everybody let me come in and learn. And helped me learn about the university, because I didn't know much about that. And there were so many that helped me along the way, you know. Eventually, as he moved down the line a little, I finally ended up after the time when Don and I, Don Eastman came along, you know, and I was still the chief operating officer, if you will,
Right.
for him, and he wanted to change that. You remember, he wanted to have y'all, the managers, report to him. I didn't feel like and wasn't nothing wrong with that. That was his duty, but I decided I wouldn't do that. And so Chuck called us over and told me that I'd be working for him from here on out. And I didn't leave the organization or anything, but we just worked out. And I'm not critical of Don. I think it was a question of, you know, just me being uncomfortable with not knowing
Right.
what my job was.
The reorganization
Right,
sort of talk.
yeah.
At one point, Larry, you were vice president for governmental relations, is that right?
That's the way I ended up. We had that. Well, I usually filled in, you know, when Don left, I filled in till, what's the lady's name? It took, came
Catherine
out.
Costello.
Catherine came, and then after, I believe she left, they had a senior vice president then. I filled in for it until he appointed somebody there. So that was Mike, I guess, more than Chuck. I never held those jobs. I just filled in, you know, so.
You filled in really well for me, I'll tell you that. At any rate, let's talk about this governmental relation thing.
Can I go back to this?
Sure.
I got my point I want to make, that when people talk about Jay Pry and Judy, you know, were my
Right.
personal folks, and that was the greatest team, you know. Jay had the ability to work internally with the staff here. I had to deal with the politician, he had to deal with them, but if we had a politician looking for something, Jay could handle it without embarrassing or offending the professional people at the university. and that he was so good at that and such a great writer. And Judy was my partner, you know, I call from that. But I think that Tom Landrum had been a ally all along, and I tell people, Tom, when I first came here, Tom taught me where the bathroom was. And,
important to know.
Yeah, but one of the things I want to make a point on, and I think one of the people, and you don't hear much about him, is Allen Barber. Mm-hmm. And the University of Georgia is a better place because of Allen Barber. His style was unique, there's no question about that. But we never had an incident where we had money misspent or things like that. You had a hitch one time about making a contract or something like that, but that turned out to be nothing to it. And I think that Allen's administration of the university's finances, administration, and things like that he deserves a tremendous amount of credit over how long, 25 years.
A long time.
Long time, and I would love to see us some way find a way to recognize that. You know, he's a dude. Sometimes he can get it. I can attest to that. Every time he'd get upset with me, he'd make me move. You know, worked in 7 different buildings over here. That's called Allen to get put out with me. Make me move, but nevertheless, he deserves a great amount of credit for the university being what it is.
Well, you know, you do. You hear things going over. I'll mention that school over in Atlanta that had, you know, some financial problems, this and that and other, and I think
we just hadn't
Dr.
you
Barber,
think back over it, you know, and you operate and put a good sized budget over here.
That's right.
And the administration. The food service is always the best. You know, our bus system is an excellent bus system. All of that personnel has always been properly managed. And I just think Allen is due a tremendous amount of credit for the University of Georgia being what it is today.
So I'm glad you spoke up on that. Talk a little bit about those. As you were, I'm going back to your governmental relations responsibility. Talk a little bit about those characters or those folks you met in the time that you were doing the.
When I was going to start, and I can't remember the fellow's name that had the government job before he went to Georgia Southern after that. I can't remember his name now. Stayed around here for a little while, but he was doing it before I came, and he introduced me to Bob Argo. And Bob was a representative there and became an advisor, a counselor to me about the legislature and whatever. He carried me to, or maybe I went to Abbott Massey, who is the preeminent, I guess you call it, lobbyist over there for the poultry industry, and to meet him and to meet Tom Daniel. And those, Tom Daniel particularly, and Abbott's advice, and Tom's working with what we call the Shoeshine Group. I don't know whether you ever heard that or not, but Tech and Georgia State Medical College, and we had all had a government representative up there. Georgia Southern did, and 1 or 2 others, but we called ourselves the Shoeshine Group. Because the Shoeshine stand at the Capitol is where everybody meets. Well, I'll see you at the Capitol. Well, where you gonna meet? I'll see you at the So we called ourselves the Shoeshine Group. But Tom Daniel was a mentor to teach me about him.
He was at the Board of Regents.
Yeah, he's a government relations. And I have often said I knew a fellow named B. Brooks back in the old days, and Mr. Brooks was a Herman Talmadge person, and he knew more about Georgia state government than anybody. And when he passed away, Tom took his place, Tom Daniel. So it was just to have him as a mentor and counselor and everything was just great. The characters at the legislature, of course, was a lot of them, everybody different, I think. Governor Harris was the governor when we first started out, and I didn't have much direct contact working with him on it, but I think I spoke about Speaker Murphy and Zell Miller both being the key people on that, but Larry Walker was probably the university's staunchest advocate, other than our who's a legislator we had here. I can't remember.
Bob Argo and
Bob Argo, and then after him it was embarrassing, but nevertheless he was
we've named something after him, Larry.
Right, but he was a factor for the university, representing the university. Larry was in a position to do more for the university. Speaker always was all right with it, but he was hard to get to sometime, I think, from that standpoint.
Does he have a degree from the university? Was he a law degree?
He's North Georgia, I believe. He had a law degree from here. He did, but I think he had a degree from North Georgia, and then came to law school here, if I remember correctly. But he was Terry Coleman was the appropriation chairman, and while Terry didn't have any attachment to it, but he was one that I know from my standpoint you could work with, and he was straight down the line. I think Robert Hobbs in the budget office was not a university person, but nevertheless he was one that you could work with and tried to help us. But I think probably Larry Walker. On the Senate side, there was a Paul Brown. The older Paul Brown was a great ally for the university, a unique individual in the Senate. He wasn't a regular. He wasn't a good old boy, but he did a lot for the university over there. Zell, of course, and Speaker Murphy being the two.
I'm not sure we talked about them on camera. Talk about Governor Miller and Speaker Tom Murphy a little bit as to what.
I think Speaker Murphy probably is the most influential Georgian of the last half of the century, and whatever, how long, the last 50 years or so, because he did so much for the state. And Speaker never was one to ever say, I did this, this sort of thing. He just, like I said earlier, I think when we were talking, he just made things happen. He knew how to use staff. He did so much. Folks don't realize, back in the before the 90s, the legislature focused on everything outside of Atlanta, because the power was in the field with the county unit system and all this. But Tom Murphy did more for Atlanta than many folks realize. And he's a little bit like Allen over here. Folks don't realize what all Allen did on it, but Speaker was so responsible for so much happening in the metropolitan area up here, and that I would label him as being the most influential person, governor or legislator, in the last 40 years or that sort of thing like that. And on the case of Zell, I think his focus on education and higher education particularly was the thing that made higher education today what it is in Georgia. I mean, if you look back where we were rated back before he came in, I mean, the amount of money he put into it, the Hope Scholarship, all of that, has allowed us to move to this level in terms of the higher education performance in the state. But that was his dream, from that standpoint. All of them did other things, but I think by and large those are the two guys. Roy Barnes came in, and I didn't work as closely much with that, I think, as I did with the other two. But higher ed was running on Zell's gas when Roy was governor.
And then things took a turn for the worse after that, didn't they?
Yeah.
Larry, did you ever work with President Carter on anything? when
Only
he was?
thing no, not really. We passed some veteran. They assigned me. I was in the military, and when the Carter administration came into the Labor Department, there wasn't many veterans in the hierarchy over there. And we had an agency in the Labor Department called Veterans Employment Service, and we did a lot of things in serving the Vietnam veterans. I had several training programs and whatever. Just happened to be in the signing room with him when he signed the bill. That was the only thing with President Carter. Directly working with him, you always showing up something at the White House, but usually Ms. Carter was entertaining more than President Carter. He wasn't much of an entertainer, He was a straightforward kind of guy, but she didn't work directly closely with him that much. So
we talked.
I think about President Reagan. I mentioned that to him. I don't know whether we were on camera or not when I was telling you about him being a really, really powerful president who knew how to hold his principles and get other people to do what they needed to do. He surrounded himself with really, really great people, and made a great contribution, I think.
Anybody else that we have missed?
I don't know. I think we had so many people in Athens here who supported the university. You can run that list from that, and I don't know of a case where we had a battle so much between the local folks and the university. I can't recall one. I mean, we may have had an issue here, there, and the other, but I think that the support from the Athens community for the university, particularly from the businessmen, a lot of them, Ed Benson, and a lot of the other guys that businessmen here who've been on the foundation and supporting the university or whatever. And I should say about the foundation too. I think our foundation has. It's changed a lot over the years. It changed kind of, I think, when I can't remember exactly when it was, but there was a kind of a deal. We split out and had two foundations for a while, and that was a
Coach Dooley
hiccup. That was a hiccup, I think. And
Preston Adams' disagreement.
And I think that was about the only spot where I say I wish it hadn't happened here, because it didn't serve the university very well. I think though that talking about the foundation, and I give Mike credit for pushing this or leading it, the advancement of the campus could not have happened if they hadn't changed around where they were using the foundation money, the real estate committee of the foundation. We had a chance to invest the foundation's money in the buildings and let us pay the money back like we would with state bonds. State bonds, you have to go to the legislature and get approval. You don't have to do that for these. I think the regents probably have to agree that you're going to build a building, but they don't have to come up with the money to do it. And I think that's one of the reasons that Mike has been able to expand the campus so much, I talk about expanding the campus. I like to tell people about my memories of driving a tank out there where the art department is out there, driving that tank and going down through the river down and into the woods when ROTC.
It's changed
a little bit, that's right.
Oh. Well, we talked about 3 careers, but Larry, you also worked at Georgia State University.
I did. Bill Essery was the secretary. I was talking about that a while ago from Danny outside of Milledgeville, and he was only secretary for 2 or 3 months, and I met him in Washington up there, but I learned a lot about him because Bill was a mediator, and he was a labor union person, but he grew to the point to where he was an expert at bringing business and labor together, and was assigned certain things by the president. He tried to mediate 2 or 3 things even after he left Secretary's office. But he came up through that vein of the Labor Department. And prior to going up there, when he left Milledgeville, he worked at the Space Center down at coast, on the coast in Florida.
Cape Canaveral?
Yeah, Cape Canaveral. And he was instrumental in avoiding there being strikes and so forth when we were developing that. So his reputation was really good. I used to say, I've heard him say it, that said the way to get things done is you get both sides in the room. You put a bottle of bourbon on the table, you lock the door and say, we ain't leaving till we straighten this out. And I've seen him operate that way, and I've seen that way operating in Washington a lot of time when you get down to, you got 2 sides, you got to settle it out, you got to do something, and Bill was really, really good at that. But to make a long story longer about Bill, he made a lot of money after that. He also was instrumental in the Toyota people coming into the country from Japan, building it and helping to mediate between the labor unions and the auto union and the Toyota people. He was basically responsible for that, and but pretty good. But he made a lot of money after he left the government, and he established the Ursary Center at Georgia State for the Ursary Center for the Workplace, and we knew each other, and I met him a time or 2, so I started doing some work over there, and we did a number of studies. First thing I did was evaluate his center and administratively to see whether he could improve on that or not. And then the second thing, I started doing studies on workforce issues, state workforce boards, employer committees, things like that around the country.
So you went back to what you had started
yeah,
with?
I did. It was basically.
Was that fun?
Enjoyed that. And it's still there. We got, Bill finally got less than happy with me trying to change the focus of the thing. I don't mean we had a scrap, but it just didn't move forward. And he kind of backed out of the Georgia State thing, and he's doing it out of whatever he does out of Milledgeville now. But Bill was a unique Georgian. He was the only Georgian, if I understand it correctly, who was a cabinet member in the last 100 years.
Is that right?
Right. We don't have another cabinet member, so he was only there for
just briefly
2 or 3 months, but nevertheless he was official. So, but I enjoyed working there. Since then, I've tried to work a little bit with they have kind of changed the workforce stuff in the state a lot in the last 3 or 4 years, and I've had some amount of difficulty relating to what they want to do, and from that standpoint. But I still want to. if we can ever get on the same page, I think so.
Talk a little bit about your family.
Well, I think you probably have come to the most important thing for me. I have told people, Fran, that Catherine and parents and my parents went to school together, and when I was 2 and she was 6 months, we were on a pallet together, and I kissed her.
You knew early on.
And when I kiss them, they stay kissed. But seriously, I finally, when we married when we were teenagers, and she was beautiful and popular and everything else, but I managed to hook her, and but then we had 3 daughters. Vicky is our oldest daughter, and the only one with grandkids, and that's Katie and Eric, who live in Boulder. And then Patty is a university graduate. Vicky graduated at Georgia Southern. Patty is the regional public affairs officer for the Social Security Administration in Atlanta.
following in your footsteps.
Yeah, I think that's right. And then Beth is I characterize all of them. Vicky is the mama, Patty is the planner and the party, and Beth is the keeper. Beth lives on our property, you know, and she's the one. She also works over at the print shop here at the university.
Is that right?
So we're keeping our eye on the university through Beth right now. So that's right. But my family has been the greatest thing. Catherine has put up with a lot. I think from that standpoint, because every job that we've talked about here today caused me to be gone so much of the time. And I have two stories I tell about how well I look after Catherine. And number one, when we moved to Washington, we moved and got there on a Friday. The furniture came in on Friday. I got up early Saturday morning and flew to Hawaii to a conference. Well, on Saturday night, I guess it was, or one night anyway, after that, I get a phone call, and the power has gone off in the house. And Catherine is in Virginia, and she don't know where nothing is. She don't even know the name of the power company, but I'm over in Hawaii having a good time at the cocktail party. And the other one is when Beth was born. I was in the military, and I was supposed to lead the advanced party to go to summer camp down at Fort Stewart. And Beth was a little late coming, and so when Friday came out, the unit was going Sunday, and I was to go Friday and get everything set up and everything. And I told the colonel, I said, I don't want to go. I said, I want to be here when Catherine has it. But he said, well, so I just put it off to Sunday. She'll have it by then. And then you can go with the rest of it. Well, Sunday morning I went out there. He ain't come yet. And I said, Colonel White, I just don't want to go. He said, well, so you stay here and you call me every day. He said, you know, there's 2 times when a man ought to be with his wife. One of them is when she has a baby, and the other one is when she gets pregnant. So I stayed there until Wednesday. Finally, Beth showed up about 8 o'clock. Well, at midnight, I headed to Fort Stewart. Let Catherine stay in the hospital by herself till I came back Saturday to take her home. But she's gone through that sort of thing. And
how long have y'all been married?
63 years.
Isn't that wonderful?
Yeah, I'm still on probation. I just want to make a point, though, that my family has been supportive. You know, I love them and all that, but they've been so supportive of me and me trying to do my thing, is stay on the road and all that. So.